In September 1992, 10 years before Christer Strömholm's death, a writer arrived breathlessly at the Stockholm airport, having run to catch a late connection to Höganäs, the photographer's hometown. Strömholm was waiting. They drove quietly in his Volvo to his house/workshop, stopping only for a quick visit to a Viking supermarket to pick up desserts, nougat ice cream and plain yogurt. It was the writer's first meeting with a man whose pictures had long been a fascination, particularly a 1963 photo from Santa Monica of a woman's head covered with hair clips, an image that seemed to encapsulate the entire 60s. The meeting had been arranged by the Swedish Cultural Center in Paris after an exhibition there. I was through the roof, the writer recalled. Strömholm, then 74, was a man with an impressive physique, as if sculpted by Rodin. He was a night owl, and his guest could hear him walking slowly in the attic, like a barn owl. He used a cane for support, having been released from the hospital shortly before the visit. His surreal studio, illuminated by ubiquitous candles, was where he finally declared himself ready for the interview. He spoke with confidence, courtesy, and an assurance that they would meet again, leaving his guest amazed at the effort he had made to host during his convalescence. The guest room was filled with art books by Degas and Walls, alongside a handful of photography books. Whenever they crossed paths in the house, the writer, worried about the passage of time, would be gently put off by Strömholm, who would repeat, "Yes, yes, we'll talk tomorrow." This was Christian Strömholm, a man who was, in his own way, like his photographs. He was a truly loved mystery, and his work was a confrontation with the mysteries of art, death, love, and dreams. His enigmatic images offered no answers. He never tried to explain, and even less to seduce. He left viewers free to interpret the twists of the world he documented, a reality to which he lent something not quite naturally supernatural. This was how his photographs became his roots, his inner experience, his avowed resistance to convention. This was his shield. He was an intractable man. Tor Christer Strömholm was born in Stockholm, Sweden on July 22, 1918. His father, Fredrik Strömholm, was an army officer from an upper-middle-class family. His mother, Lizzie, was from Gothenburg. The family moved frequently between different regiments in Sweden, including Exio, Lidingö, Boden, and Stockholm. His childhood was marked by instability. In 1924, his parents divorced, only to remarry shortly thereafter. Strömholm later described himself as a child of divorce with 2 fathers and 2 mothers. He was a lonely child. His nanny called him a real little horror, one who preferred playing with his dog Bob, a snarling bulldog, rather than his friends. "I was a lonely child, and I learned to take advantage of my 2 step-parents," he recalled in a 2000 interview. "At an early age, I knew what I wanted, and I was used to having my own way." This tumultuous early life was shattered in 1934 when his father shot himself with his service weapon. Christer was 16. Years later, he would keep a single hand-colored portrait of his mother, Lizzie, taken in Gothenburg in 1885. He had found it when she died, tucked into a copy of the Swedish daily Svenska Dagbladet from 1908, and locked it away in a metal box. Parallel to his personal turmoil, a dark political radicalization was taking place. Beginning in 1932, at the age of 14, Strömholm became active in the Nazi Nordic Youth movement, which was modeled after the Hitler Youth. He led one of its cells and in 1936 hoisted a flag with a swastika on the People's House in Stockholm. His involvement deepened in 1938 when he and other young Nazis broke into the offices of the socialist organization Clarté, stealing its membership lists. He was subsequently sentenced to conditional labor for the crime. At the same time, his wealthy family was pushing him toward a conventional upper-class education. In 1935, he graduated from Enskilde Gymnasiet and was sent to Morungen, south of Berlin, as an exchange student to study German. I was expected to know horseback riding, how to play tennis, and bridge, he said, which were things I had to learn, but in German. It was a way of being a part of the social life. His interest in art had begun very early. When considering a profession, he felt there weren't many choices. One of the most natural things for me was art and to make pictures. His parents, wanting him to learn German, sent him to Dresden in 1937 to study art under Professor Waldemar Winkler. The stay was brief. I wasn't happy in Germany, Strömholm stated flatly. He came into conflict with his teacher over banned artists. We had different opinions about Klee and Nolde. I liked their pictures, but my teacher didn't. It turned out to be a big deal, and I was asked to leave the school. He left Germany for Prague and then for Paris. 3 years after his father's suicide on April 18, 1937, the 19-year-old Christer Strömholm arrived in the city that would define his life. He was, by his own admission, still a young snob dressed in tailored suits. Paris, he would later say, was a city that, more than any other, had shaped my life. From there, he traveled to Arles to meet the Swedish artist Dick Beer, who became his master and mentor. They traveled together in southern France, with Beer instructing him in art history and technique. He also studied painting at the Académie André Lotte in Paris. In the autumn of 1938, he returned to Sweden and began painting with Otto Skold and Isaac Grunwald, while also studying art in Florence and Rome. He felt art meant museums then, and Florence was the place where the knowledge was. As Europe descended into war, Strömholm's life of tailored suits and art museums came to an abrupt end. Between 1936 and 1939, he had already volunteered in the Spanish Civil War, undertaking 2 assignments as a courier. He had ended up at a castle in Lestac in 1938, staying with a Danish family who were sympathetic to the Republicans. I was Swedish, had a driving license, and knew how to drive a car, he explained. His assignment was to go to Spain via Andorra to retrieve a report and a film that couldn't be sent by ordinary mail. What he saw there changed him. The war that I had only read about, now I heard it. I saw the people coming back, and this was the war. War so unromantic. Everything was crazy. He witnessed the Battle of Gandesa, tanks against horses. This experience became a turning point. I already had an anti-Nazi attitude, he said, and now I adopted the anti-communist attitude when I saw the hostility between anarchists and communists. After returning to the castle and briefly visiting Dick Beer in Arles, he went to Sweden for his military service in 1939. Months later, the Winter War in Finland broke out. I believe it was a natural reaction, he said. My father was an officer in the Finnish Lapland Regiment, an honorary officer, so it was natural for me to enlist. The dandy would vanish in 1939, as one text notes, when the Finnish army enlisted him as a tank commander. He served for 3 winter months as a volunteer in anti-tank units, fighting in a real pitched battle on the Sela front. When that war finished, he and his comrades went home for only 2 or 3 days before the Germans occupied Denmark and Norway. Almost entirely the same group as before, he recalled, continued as a volunteer corps. He joined the Norwegian resistance, forming a ranger corps called Grupp Kani. With a friend, we were continuously fighting against the Germans. We were on the retreat all the time. The Germans were totally different as soldiers. They were simply smarter than we were. From 1942 to 1945, he also served as a courier for the Norwegian resistance based in Stockholm and served the English in Stockholm for the Norwegian side. In 1945, he was decorated with the Norwegian War Medal. However, his allegiances remained complex. In a stark contradiction to his celebrated resistance narrative, Strömholm was convicted in court in 1945 after the war's end for sheltering Norwegian Nazis and Waffen-SS volunteers who were on the run. During this period, he married his first wife, Ellen Bergman. After the Second World War, Strömholm returned to Paris. Having served in the army, he was offered 2 or 3 years of university studies. He enrolled at the Academia des Beaux-Arts in 1946 and settled in the city. I stayed at a hotel and lived an ordinary Paris life. I sat at bars and ate at restaurants, he said. He traveled often in the summers to Spain, North Africa, and Italy, and also pursued art studies in Faenza and Florence. He married his second wife, Dani Lamb, in 1946 to 1951, and in 1947 their son Joachim Strömholm was born. Joachim would also become a photographer and would later make a documentary about his father, helping Christer reconnect with a childhood he found too intimate to discuss. It was during this post-war period that he really discovered photography. The reason was practical. Simply because I could earn my living this way. With my camera hanging around my neck, people knew I was a photographer. I discovered that being together with journalists gave me opportunities. As journalists need photos, I took photos and got paid immediately. He made it clear he never did real commercial jobs. He adopted the artist pseudonym Christer Christian because, as he put it, it was impossible to learn the name Strömholm. He used this name on all his photographs from this era. He began producing a series of artist portraits, photographing celebrities like Man Ray, Marcel Duchamp, and Le Corbusier. I met them at the art bars or cafes that everybody frequented, he explained. After some time, you recognize each other and say hello. I discovered I had a talent for getting inside the shell of the artists, since I knew their work. He cited Duchamp, Man Ray, and Le Corbusier as general influences. His travels continued, but now with a camera. From 1946 to 1948, he traveled to the Atlas Mountains and Carthage on behalf of the Ethnographic Museum in Stockholm. In 1949, he worked as an ambulance driver for the Swedish Spanish Aid, picking up Spanish refugee children in Perpignan who needed adoptive parents and driving them to the Jura Mountains. It was on these trips at a large barn where they stopped to rest that he took his memorable pictures of the children. In 1949, he also had an exhibition in Paris that was seen by Dr. Otto Steinhardt. This led to him joining Steinhardt's German group, Photoform, a movement for subjective photography. This was a pivotal moment. It turned out to be very important because my way of taking pictures became accepted, Strömholm said. I got publicity in the artistic world. Exhibiting together with Dr. Otto Steinhardt meant that my pictures were shown in the papers, not as photographs, but as art. It was also during this time that he honed his signature aesthetic. The American photographer Louis Stettner told him about a special paper he'd bought at a flea market. I bought the paper and the pictures turned out almost entirely black and white, and I liked that, Strömholm said. I picked it up as a manner. The others copied this method from me. He married for a third time to Inga Dersen Ayres from 1951 to 1954. His wild life continued. In 1952, he went to Tangier. I went to Tangier out of curiosity and also because I had a friend who was a cook on a boat. Tangier was a refuge where I did some business. Among other things, I smuggled binoculars to the Canary Islands. He even got a job as a cook on one of the boats, he claimed, because I knew how to shoot with a machine gun. He was still painting too. He studied in Florence again in 1955. Years later, he would look at his paintings from the 50s and say, "These paintings are still interesting because they were made in the 50s. They are modern today." In 1956, he collaborated with Peter Weiss on the documentary Ansikten I skugga, Faces in Shadow, about the regulars in the old beer houses of Stockholm's old town. Strömholm handled the photography, capturing the guests with a hidden 16mm camera. In 1956, Strömholm moved back to Paris, where he would remain until 1962. It was during these 6 years that he produced his most famous and powerful work, the intimate documentation of the transsexual woman in the Place Blanche neighborhood. He had first encountered them in 1947, but now he began to photograph them seriously, a project that would last for almost a decade. Place Blanche became very important, he said. It was an important part of my photographic activities. His interest was sparked by a desire to understand. It was because I didn't understand it myself. I hadn't given it a thought until I met them. As soon as you ask yourself why their lives are the way they are, it becomes difficult not to take pictures. It was, he admitted, hard work, and it was interesting. He had to navigate their complex lives as prostitutes. You have to be interested in people to make these pictures. I want a good relationship with the person, and therefore I have to show respect. Respect is important. I tried to enter their world, and I believe I succeeded. Decades later, he would remember them, reciting their names with fervor, eyes closed, in a sing-song voice. Gina, Jacqueline, Nana, Cobra, Marie-José, Les Amis de la Place Blanche. During this period, he also married his fourth wife, Anna Clara Krusenberg, from 1957 to 1968, an SAS air stewardess. This connection allowed him to travel the world for modest fares. In 1959, their son Jacob Strömholm, now an architect, was born. To support his family, he took a job from 1958 to 1961 as a tour guide for Scandinavian touring, guiding 19 bus trips from Sweden to Spain. I had a good deal of general knowledge as well as art knowledge, so I could guide the tourists without problems, he said. He photographed extensively on these trips, and it was here he felt his work matured. I believe they're important because I felt I controlled the photography. I could handle the individual picture. This is the beginning of the non-thematic photographs. In 1956, he had also begun teaching photography at an evening school at Stockholm University. In 1962, he and Tor Ivan Odolf co-founded this class into the so-called Fotoskolan, the first photo school at the university. Strömholm served as its director until 1974. He was a transformative teacher. From 1962 to 1974, the school graduated 1,228 students from 28 nationalities, including many who would become the elite of contemporary Scandinavian photography, such as Anders Petersen, Bill August, Björn Davidson, and Gunnar Smoljanski. He instilled in them his core precept: seeing is a duty, voir est un devoir, and its corollary. Photographs are created inside the photographer's head, never inside the camera. He thrived on the interaction. The students perceived my pictures in their way, and that strengthened me, he said. I think they thought I was good. They saw things I hadn't seen, so it was essential. He and Odolf were completely dedicated. You have to remember that we had 1,200 students that could call us 24 hours a day. We were awake anyway. While running the school, his global travels intensified. He visited Tokyo in 1961, Hiroshima, Calcutta, Nairobi, and Los Angeles in 1963, and New York in 1965. He held his first major exhibitions, Till minnet of mig själv, in memory of myself, in 1965, and Dödsbilder, pictures of death, in 1966. In 1967, he published his cult classic book, Poste Restante. After leaving Fotoskolan in 1974, Strömholm returned to Paris from 1970 to 1978. He lived with the artist Angelica Jollner during this time. He began dividing his time between Paris and a ruin he had acquired in Fox-Amphoe province, which he transformed into a modern country house, water, electricity, and a dark room. He was rigorous in his work, even while destabilizing his own frontal vision. He was fond of quoting August Sandler. He tried to do his job with irony, and his old colleague Otto Steinert. He used a Rolleiflex in his early days, a Leica for his artist portraits, and a Polaroid camera to create bizarre collages. His photographs, he said, were not necessarily photographic pictures. He was an image maker. What's important to me is what the picture says. The impression of the picture is what matters. That is even more important than the truth, a photographic truth. His work always showed the underside of life, the incoherence of the past, the plurality of love, the vertigo of coincidence, the chaos of creativity, and the shadows that follow us here and there, obstinately, like a dog without a master. He explained his process as one of reception. I seldom leave home without my camera. This means I'm prepared to simply be there and to be available and receive the reality I meet. And the reality is I. What happens to me? And if you're open, there are so many things happening. This resulted in a vast and uncharacterizable body of work. I have too many different types of pictures, he admitted. He gave an example. The dead dog in Tarragona that's filed among nightclub and striptease negatives taken in Barcelona. The thing is that I was in Barcelona one night and had been in Tarragona a couple of hours south earlier the same evening. He knew Brassai very well and respected his slow way of working, planning pictures and changing light bulbs. But Strömholm's own method was more instinctive. He spoke of the finger pressing the button to release the shutter, acting faster than the thought. He said, "The picture you didn't intend to take is the one you later are ecstatic about having taken," citing his photo of the two boys in Paris with the handbags as an example. In 1978, he met the actress Ingalill Rydberg, with whom he lived as a partner for 9 years and then as close friend and neighbor until his death. That same year, his first retrospective, Privata Bilder, Private Pictures, opened in Stockholm. In 1981, he suffered a stroke from which he gradually recovered. In 1982, he was awarded a guaranteed income for visual artists by the Swedish government. His major retrospective, 9 sekunder av mitt liv, 9 seconds of my life, opened at the Moderna Museet in 1986 to greet acclaim seen by 40,000 people. For a long time, however, he had been a photographer little known in Europe. This was noted by William Messer in the Belgian magazine Clichés in February 1987 in an article aptly titled La Reconnaissance Enfin, Recognition at Last. In his later years, he worked on his Golgotha set, a series from the 80s and 90s. I found a meeting point between a story and the pictures, to let objects and stones become faces. What you see is a stone, and what you see if you take a closer look suddenly becomes a face. In 1993, the Swedish government appointed him to a professorship in photography. In 1995, he was immortalized in a very chaste and very beautiful nude portrait by Tuija Lindström, showing him sleeping at Fox am Fro under a mosquito net like a baby in a crib, his sculpted body peaceful as if tempered by the southern heat. In 1998, he received the 1997 International Hasselblad Award. The award citation finally cemented his status, calling him one of Scandinavia's leading photographers and the first post-war photographer to gain international renown. As he was filing his black and white prints into cardboard boxes under a backlit table, he told the writer visiting him in Höganäs, "I don't want to be mummified alive." Christer Strömholm died on January 11, 2002. The writer who visited him in 1992 never saw him again. "His memory accompanies me, maybe even his ghost," the writer concluded. "He belongs for eternity to the Paris I love, to Pigalle with its snake charmer and the male-female Gina, Jacqueline, Nana, Cobra, Mary José, Les Amis de la Place Blanche. He was the man who could decipher the language of stones in Draguignan of Tangier, the man who transformed a ruin in Provence, and the man who, above all, remained an enigma."